Ella sat at the bar, swirling her drink, trying to enjoy the weird but thrilling atmosphere of Earth's first alien visit night. The buzz in the air was electric. Strange beings from every corner of the galaxy had gathered in the bar, making it feel more like a zoo than a social event. She wasn't particularly thrilled about meeting anyone, let alone a giant alien, but there she was, hoping to escape her usual routine for just one night. The first sign something was off came when a shadow loomed over her. She glanced up to see an alien towering above her, his broad shoulders easily bumping into the ceiling. He was colossal, so much so that it felt like the room was shrinking around him. He was wearing a tight, silver suit that accentuated his massive muscles. His eyes, deep and mysterious, locked onto hers with a predatory intensity. "I'm too big for you, human." His voice was a deep rumble that vibrated in her chest. He didn't sound threatening, but there was no mistaking the arrogance in his tone. Ella blinked, surprised, then quickly regained her composure. She wasn't about to let some oversized alien get to her. She leaned back in her chair and shot him a smirk. "Well, I've handled bigger," she said, winking for effect. The alien looked momentarily thrown off by her response, his thick brows furrowing. He wasn't used to human reactions, particularly ones like hers. Ella, on the other hand, was just playing her usual game of keeping her cool in any situation. It was the way she survived this long in a world that seemed designed to make you uncomfortable. "You humans are fascinating," the alien said, clearly both amused and intrigued. "I've never met a species quite like you." He sat down beside her, his body taking up almost the entire bench, which forced Ella to shift uncomfortably to the edge. "Fascinating, huh? Well, you should be careful with that word," she teased. "It usually means you're either interested or just mildly confused." He chuckled, a deep, gravelly sound that made everyone in the bar glance over. Maybe a little bit of both. His smile was broad and oddly charming, considering his intimidating size. There was an air of something different about him. An alien with a sense of humor? That was unexpected. "So, what brings a guy like you to a place like this?" Ella asked, leaning in slightly, intrigued by the fact that he wasn't just another overconfident alien with the superiority complex. "I'm here for the experience," he replied, his gaze lingering on her a little too long. "I've heard so much about humans, how you're different from the others in the galaxy. But this..." He gestured to her casually, his massive hands somehow delicate in the way they moved. "This is something entirely new." Ella raised an eyebrow. "Well, you're certainly different yourself." She eyed him up and down, unable to hide the fact that his sheer size was both awe-inspiring and slightly terrifying. "You do know the whole too big thing isn't a great pickup line, right?" His laugh boomed, filling the room. "Is that what you think this is? A pickup line? Come on, it's pretty obvious. You come in here, flex your muscles, make a comment about being too big, then expect me to swoon." "No swooning required," he said, leaning closer. His voice dropped an octave. "I'm more interested in seeing if you can handle what comes next." Ella couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. He was trying too hard, which, if anything, made him more endearing. "Oh, I can handle a lot, but you might be asking for more than you bargained for." "You think so?" he asked, eyes narrowing slightly as he gave her a sly smile. Ella considered this for a moment, the challenge in his words now fully apparent. It wasn't the size difference that interested her. It was the audacity, the way he seemed so sure of himself, yet so genuinely confused by her. It was charming, in an absurd alien way. And maybe that was the problem. She wasn't used to someone like him, someone who was both overconfident and underprepared at the same time. "All right, big guy," she said, grinning. "You're clearly full of yourself. But let's see if you can back up that talk." "I always back it up, human," he said with a wink, his voice playful. Ella leaned back in her chair, feeling more at ease now, the initial shock of his size fading into the background. This was exactly the kind of challenge she'd been craving, an odd, ridiculous game of wits. "Okay then, prove it." Zorth stood up, towering above her with an air of grandeur. He stretched his arms wide, nearly knocking a drink off the table. The people around them chuckled, amused by the spectacle, but Ella didn't flinch. She watched as he moved, his every step like a deliberate showcase of his power. It wasn't arrogance, it was his reality. I'll prove it. You don't think I'm too big? Then let's see how well you handle my size. His voice held that same playful edge, yet there was something else underneath. Something serious. Ella shook her head, amused by the strange turn this conversation had taken. You've got a funny way of impressing someone. She leaned in close, lowering her voice just enough to tease. But hey, if you're really up for the challenge, show me what you've got. The tension between them, playful and charged, was palpable. He smiled again, that knowing, slightly mischievous grin, and took a step closer. He bent slightly, as though to make himself less intimidating, an odd but endearing gesture for such a massive being. But Ella, ever the skeptic, couldn't help but wonder how far this would really go. The alien's confidence was one thing. His ability to handle a human like her was another. Yet, for some strange reason, she found herself genuinely curious to see where this went. Zoratha's deep laughter resonated in her ears as he said, "The challenge is on, human. But be warned, I don't lose." Ella leaned back, her smirk widening. "We'll see about that." Ella leaned back, eyes narrowing as she watched Zoratha's massive form tower over the table. His presence filled the space like a wave crashing against a tiny ship, and yet she was oddly unaffected. The air was thick with the tension of a challenge, but not the kind that usually went down in this bar. Most people came here to drink and talk about their alien encounters. Ella wasn't here for that. She was here for something else, something real. And Zorath? Well, he was about to learn what it meant to face a human who wasn't easily impressed. "All right, big guy," she said, tapping her fingers on the table rhythmically, playing along with the playful tension in the air. "You want to prove something? Do your worst." Zoratha's lips curled into a grin, the edges of his fangs glinting in the dim light of the bar. "I don't think you're ready for what comes next." Ella rolled her eyes, but her heart skipped a beat. There was something about this alien, this massive, intimidating force, that drew her in, even when he acted like he could snap her in half with a single hand. The double meaning was clear. It wasn't just about physical size. No, this was a battle of egos, and Ella was no stranger to that game. "I'm always ready," she shot back, her voice low and laced with sarcasm. "You just don't know it yet." He stepped forward, his huge frame bending awkwardly to match her height. Despite his size, there was an endearing awkwardness to him when he tried to fit into human spaces. His hands, large enough to cradle a car, fumbled with a glass of water like he was handling a delicate flower. Ella fought the urge to laugh. This was new. Most aliens she'd met were either way too serious or arrogant, but Zorath? He was different. "Your planet is full of contradictions," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "You're small, but your species has more fire than any other in the galaxy. I've never met anyone like you." Ella raised an eyebrow. "Fire, huh? Is that what you think this is?" She gestured to herself. "I'm just a regular human." He shook his head, still watching her with that intense, almost possessive gaze. "Not like the others," he said, his voice rough but affectionate. "You challenge everything, even me." That struck a chord. She leaned in, her lips curling into a sly smile. "You think you've got me figured out?" Zorath chuckled, a sound like rolling thunder. "I think you've got yourself figured out," he said, his eyes twinkling with a mix of respect and amusement. "You're not scared. Not of me. Not of anything." It was true, she thought. Ella wasn't easily intimidated. She wasn't about to let some gigantic alien swagger around like he owned the place. She had her own power, her own way of handling things, and no matter how big he was, it wasn't going to change that. "You think you can play with me, huh?" she said, leaning closer now, her tone sharp with challenge. "You've got a lot of size, but that doesn't impress me." Zorath raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "No. What impresses you then, human?" Ella's grin widened, her eyes glinting with mischief. "I'm impressed by someone who knows how to use what they've got." She leaned back, crossing her arms. "And that's not just about size, you know. It's about brains. About being clever." Zoratha's expression shifted. The challenge hung in the air like a spark ready to ignite. You think I'm not clever? She shook her head, the playful tone in her voice never fading. I think you're clever in the ways you know. But humans? We're different. We think on our feet. We adapt. He leaned in, towering over her, his voice dropping lower. What do you say then? Prove it. Show me how a small human can keep up with someone like me. Her pulse quickened, but she didn't back down. Instead, she held his gaze, as if daring him to make the next move. Oh, I'll show you, she said, her words laced with teasing defiance. But not in the way you think. Zortha's smile faltered just slightly, like he hadn't expected this side of her. The intensity in his eyes softened a bit, as if seeing her in a new light. There was something about her confidence, her ability to go toe-to-toe with him, that made him want to play along even more. He was intrigued, maybe even a little fascinated by how effortlessly she turned the tables on him. All right, human, he said, standing tall and stretching to his full height. I'm game. Ella rolled her shoulders, preparing herself for whatever came next. She could feel the energy between them shifting, the playful banter turning into something far more dangerous, but thrilling. So, she started, the words dripping with subtle innuendo. How do you want to do this? A battle of wits? A physical contest? Her lips quirked up at the corners. Or maybe you've got something else in mind. Zortha's grin widened again, this time with a bit more edge. I think we'll start with something simple, he said. If you can keep up with me for the next hour, maybe we'll talk about what comes after. Ella wasn't sure if she was more excited by the prospect of what came next, or by the challenge of keeping him on his toes. She wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. And if he thought this was just a game of size, he had another thing coming. Bring it on, Zorth, she said with a wink, tapping her glass. You might be big, but I've got surprises of my own. Zortha's eyes gleamed with something deeper, something more than just amusement. Ella had ignited something in him, something he hadn't expected. She wasn't like the others, and that in itself was a dangerous game to play. But he was ready. Let's see if you can handle it, human, he said, his voice heavy with the promise of a challenge. And this time, he wasn't joking. Zorth stood in front of Ella, his massive form casting a shadow over her as he cracked his knuckles, preparing himself for whatever ridiculous game she had in mind. It wasn't often that someone challenged him with such audacity, and even less often that they held their ground. Humans were known for their quick wit and tendency to get themselves into trouble. But this one was different. She wasn't backing down. She was embracing it. Ella smirked, leaning back casually against the counter as if she were ready for a lazy afternoon, not the impossible task of besting a giant alien. She was still amused by the sheer absurdity of the situation. All right, Zorth, you want to play? Let's make it interesting, she said, her eyes gleaming with mischief. Interesting. Zorth's voice rumbled low, and he tilted his head, clearly intrigued. How do you plan to make it interesting? Oh, I've got my ways, Ella said, tapping her fingers on the counter, making a deliberate show of her confidence. Let's see if your size actually makes a difference when it comes to brains. I bet I can outsmart you. Zorth's expression shifted to one of genuine curiosity, his glowing eyes narrowing. He stepped forward, now towering above her in a way that made even the seasoned bar regulars glance nervously at each other. Brains, huh? He muttered, almost to himself. I've seen a lot of things in this galaxy, human, but if you think you can outwit me... I don't just think it, Zorth. She cut him off with a sly grin. I know it. There was a moment of silence before he finally laughed, the sound deep and booming, like thunder rolling across the desert. All right then, let's make this interesting. I'll give you the first move. Ella raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a grin. Oh, don't worry. I've got a move for you. She casually picked up a small, metallic object from the bar, twirling it between her fingers. It was just a piece of tech lying around, nothing special, but the way she handled it, with such casual precision, made Zorth's curiosity spike. Your move, human, Zorth said, stepping back slightly to give her space. His massive frame loomed over her, but the gleam in his eyes was no longer one of menace. There was something else, something almost playful. Ella didn't hesitate. She tossed the object up into the air, making a show of focusing on it for a moment. "I'll make it simple," she said, her voice dripping with confidence. "A bet. If I can get this piece of tech to do what I want, you have to follow my lead for the rest of the night. No questions. No backing out." Zorith blinked. "That's it. That's it," she said, her voice steady as she watched the small tech piece hover in the air, controlled by her hand. It wasn't impressive, just some basic tech, but the way she presented it made it seem like a grand, complex maneuver. The challenge wasn't the tech itself. The challenge was in the way she played the game, in the way she threw him off balance. Zorith looked at her, studying her face, and for a second, something shifted in his expression. There was a flicker of respect. "You don't back down, do you?" Ella's lips curled into a smug smile. "What fun would that be?" She guided the tech into a perfect hover before it dropped back into her palm with a soft clink. Done. For a second, Zorith didn't move. He simply stood there, looking at her as if he were trying to gauge her, trying to figure out where the trick lay. But after a few long seconds, a slow grin spread across his face. "You're good, human. But now, you'll see what happens when you make the mistake of challenging me." Ella leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "I'm not scared of you, Zorith. You've got size, but I've got a mind that works faster than your muscles can react. I've been around the galaxy, Ella. You'd be surprised how quickly I can move." His grin was almost wolfish now. There was no sign of retreat in him. "You'll see." It was a warning, but it was also a challenge, one that Ella welcomed with open arms. "Well then, you better keep up," she said, her voice sharp with both humor and something else, something more dangerous. Zorith moved closer, and for a moment, it seemed like everything slowed down. His size was overwhelming, but Ella didn't flinch. Instead, she simply stood tall, meeting his gaze with a mixture of amusement and genuine interest. She knew that this wasn't just about tech or size. This was about power, emotional, intellectual, and maybe even physical. But she was ready for it. She could feel the shift in the air, the electricity crackling between them as if this game was about to become something much more complicated than either of them had imagined. "I told you I wouldn't lose," Zorith said, his voice low and steady. "But you haven't seen anything yet. If you think you've won, you're mistaken." Ella's heart raced, not with fear, but with excitement. "Oh, I know I haven't won yet, but you're about to get a crash course in humans." And with that, the game took a turn. There was no going back. They were both in it now, locked in a battle of wits, a challenge of wills, each one determined to outdo the other. But what Zorith didn't realize was that he wasn't just dealing with a human. He was dealing with someone who wasn't afraid to take risks, to push boundaries, and to play the game in ways he'd never expected. "Let's see how far you're willing to go," Ella said with a grin, her eyes gleaming with mischief. Zorith's laugh rumbled again, but this time it was tinged with something else. Admiration? Respect? Or was it just the thrill of the chase? Either way, he was hooked, and for the first time, he realized that Ella might just be the one person he couldn't predict. "I think you'll find, human," he said, his tone more serious now. "I'm never the one who loses." Ella tilted her head, her smile never fading. "We'll see about that." Ella's mind raced as she stood in the middle of the challenge. Zorith, towering and unwavering, had thrown down the gauntlet, and she was ready to pick it up. The game had shifted now. What started as playful banter, a battle of words and wits, had escalated into something more intense, something more dangerous. But Ella wasn't about to back down. She never did. Zorith's gaze never wavered. His intense, alien eyes bored into hers, and the weight of his presence was nearly suffocating. But even with that, Ella couldn't shake the feeling that she was winning. She was making him think. She was throwing him off his game. For all his strength, size, and power, he still didn't understand humans. And that was where she had him. "So, what's your next move, big guy?" she asked, leaning in slightly, her voice dripping with challenge. "You think your size is enough to intimidate me? Please. I've been around tougher men than you." Zorith didn't respond immediately. His lips curled into a half-smile, but his eyes were calculating, studying her every move. "You talk a big game, human," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "But talk doesn't win wars." Ella's lips quirked into a sly grin. "Maybe not, but it sure makes you second-guess every move you make." There was a brief moment of silence before Zoratha's laughter rumbled again, deep and booming, filling the room with a sound that made everyone around them take a step back. "You're something else," he said, shaking his head. "But don't mistake words for strength. You haven't seen what I'm capable of." Ella met his challenge head-on. She wasn't intimidated. If anything, she was emboldened. She didn't need brute strength. She had something far more dangerous: wit, cleverness, and the ability to see through the surface to what truly mattered. "I'm not looking for strength," she said, her voice calm and measured. "I'm looking for substance. And you, Zorath, are nothing but fluff." Zoratha's smile faltered slightly, but only for a moment. He wasn't used to being talked to this way. Not by anyone, especially not a human. But Ella's sharp tongue was something he wasn't used to, and it intrigued him. "Fluff," he repeated. "You think I'm nothing but fluff." "Oh, I'm sure you've got plenty of muscle," she said, her tone teasing. "But what's that muscle for if you can't use your brain? You might be big, Zorath, but you're not invincible, and I can prove it." He took a step closer, his shadow looming over her. His imposing size was meant to intimidate, but Ella didn't flinch. "You think you can outsmart me?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous now. "You're playing a very dangerous game." Ella didn't back down. "I'm always playing dangerous games, and I always win." Zorath chuckled, shaking his head. "You humans, always thinking you can outwit the universe. But I've seen things you can't even begin to imagine." He was slowly closing the distance between them now, his voice steady but laced with a hint of something darker. "I've destroyed planets. I've battled the strongest beings in the galaxy. And now I'm here facing you." Ella stepped forward, meeting his challenge head-on. She wasn't afraid of him, at least, not in the way he expected. And yet, here you are, facing a human who just outplayed you with nothing but her wits. For a second, Zorath was silent. There was something in the way Ella spoke that made him hesitate, something that made him question everything he knew about his place in the universe. He wasn't used to being taken off guard like this, and it unnerved him. But in a way, it was thrilling. No one had ever dared to challenge him like this. "You're bold," he said, his tone a mix of admiration and something else, something deeper. "But don't mistake that for victory." Ella smiled. "I don't need your approval, Zorath. I'm already winning." He took another step closer, his eyes flicking down to her lips for a fraction of a second. The air between them crackled with tension, but it wasn't the kind of tension that spoke of violence. It was the kind that spoke of something far more dangerous: attraction. "So what happens now?" he asked, his voice softer now. His earlier menace had faded, replaced by something else: curiosity. "You've outwitted me. You've played the game. But what's the end game here, Ella?" Ella looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "The end game? That's simple. You think you're the one in control here. But you're not. You've never been in control. Not really." Zoratha's brow furrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've already won," she said, her voice confident. "You came here thinking you'd intimidate me. You thought I'd cower in the face of your size, your power. But you didn't expect someone who could turn your strength against you, did you?" Zorath took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling with the weight of her words. It was true, he realized. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected Ella to be so unpredictable, so cunning. It was a quality he admired, but it also made him feel something he wasn't used to: vulnerability. Ella saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, and for the first time, she saw him not as a towering alien, but as someone just as human as she was, someone who had his own flaws and weaknesses, just like anyone else. It was in that moment that she realized something else. She wasn't just playing a game anymore. She was changing the rules of it. "You're right," Zorath said finally, his voice quieter now, almost thoughtful. "I underestimated you." Ella stepped back, her smile widening. "And that, Zorath, is your biggest mistake." For a moment, Neither of them said anything. The world outside of their little bubble seemed to fall away. There was just the two of them, standing on the edge of something neither had expected, something neither had prepared for. But the game wasn't over. Not yet. Zoratha's eyes softened, and for the first time, he truly looked at Ella. Not as a challenge, not as an enemy, but as someone who had completely turned his world upside down. And in that moment, he realized that this wasn't just about proving who was stronger or smarter. It was about something else. Something deeper. Something that neither of them fully understood yet. "I don't know what's going to happen next," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "But I think we've only just begun." Ella's smile never faded. "Exactly.